Lucas Miller looked ordinary from the outside. 9 years old, average height for his age, a calm voice, but his eyes, they were a little too deep. They lived in Arezzo, an old city where stone streets narrow and church bells echo through the mornings. Lucas was used to those bells. Sometimes he would lift his head a few seconds before they rang. No one knew why. His mother, Emily, always thought his quietness was just part of his nature. Like his father, she would say. David Miller was a quiet man too. No raised voices at home, no arguments. Everything appeared exactly as it should be. But Lucas, sometimes he didn't behave the way things were supposed to be. One day at school, his teacher asked him to draw his family. Lucas took the paper. He drew his mother. He drew his father. He drew the house. Then he stopped. In the corner of the page, without anyone noticing, he drew a narrow street, wet stones, long shadows, and a figure watching from a distance. The teacher didn't see it, but when Lucas finished, he pressed hard on the eraser, as if there were a mark that wouldn't come off. The nights were similar. Lucas didn't scream in his sleep. He didn't cry. But sometimes Emily would stand outside his door and listen, because his breathing, it wasn't the breathing of a sleeping child. It was deep, irregular, fast, as if he was afraid of missing something. One night Emily finally asked, "Did you see something in your dream?" Lucas answered from under the blanket. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling. "I did," he said, "but it didn't feel like a dream." Emily dismissed it as imagination. What else could it be? But the next morning, Lucas refused to take his usual route to school, the one that passed in front of the church. "It's crowded," he said. But at that hour, it never was. Emily didn't insist. From that day on, whenever Lucas passed the church, he lowered his head, as if something inside was watching him. One Sunday morning, while his family was at home, Lucas stepped outside. No one noticed. His steps were slow, uncertain, but he didn't turn back. When he walked through the church doors, he didn't know what to do. He only knew one thing. He felt that he was supposed to be there, and in that moment, the first silent step was taken. The step that would turn this from an ordinary child's story into something else entirely. It all started with an illness. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming. One evening, Lucas felt weak. He didn't eat, went to bed early. Around midnight, his fever rose. When Emily touched his forehead, she flinched. It was high, but Lucas wasn't shaking. He wasn't delirious. His eyes were open. "Do you want some water?" his mother asked. Lucas shook his head. His gaze was fixed on a point in the room, as if he were listening to something. That night, Lucas woke up several times, but not in panic, not in fear. Each time it was the same feeling, as if he was late. By morning, the fever was gone. The doctor came. A simple infection, he said. 2 days of rest would be enough. And physically, Lucas did recover. But Lucas was no longer the same Lucas. After the illness, it felt like something was constantly checking on him. Sometimes he would stop and think, but he couldn't explain what he was thinking about. When asked, he would only say, "It feels like I'm not supposed to forget something." Emily believed it would pass. That's how children were. They fixated on things, then moved on. But Lucas didn't move on. At night, he slept less. Yet he wasn't fully awake either. He would lie still in bed, staring at the ceiling. One night, as Emily watched him from the doorway, Lucas whispered, "Mom." "I'm here," Emily said. There was a pause. Then Lucas spoke again. "Sometimes, I think I'm late for someone." Emily didn't know what to say. "For who?" she asked. Lucas didn't answer. The next day, Lucas began apologizing for no reason, for a table he hadn't bumped into, for a glass he hadn't broken, for things he hadn't done. "It's okay," his father David said. "You didn't do anything." Lucas nodded, but he didn't feel relieved, because guilt doesn't disappear through logic. One evening at the dinner table, Lucas picked up his fork, then put it down. He looked at his hands. "Is something wrong?" his mother asked. "No," Lucas said, "but sometimes my hands don't feel like they belong to me." David ignored it. Child psychology, he thought. Better not to push it. But Lucas kept turning inward. At school one day, the teacher brought in old photographs. The city years ago. Narrow streets, stone roads. Lucas stared at one of the photos for a long time. The teacher approached him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. Lucas nodded, but his voice was quiet. "It gets more slippery when it's wet," he said. The teacher didn't understand what he meant. She smiled and moved on. But when Lucas came home that day, he took off his shoes at the door. He examined the soles for a long time, as if he were looking for something. And from that moment on, whatever Lucas was carrying inside him stopped being just a feeling. It found a direction, but it still had no name. Lucas no longer said he was dreaming. He didn't say, "I remember weather." But on some mornings, the moment he woke up, he turned his pillow over, because his face was sweaty. Not feverish, just damp. The dreams weren't frightening. At least that's what Lucas said. One morning he said, "No one is screaming. That's worse." When his mother asked what he meant, Lucas thought for a while. "There are sounds," he said finally, "but they're not coming to me." At night, there was always the same scene. A narrow street. When Lucas drew this street, his hands didn't shake. He wasn't rushed. It was as if he were copying a place he knew, so he wouldn't forget it. The stones were always wet, but there was no rain. On one corner, there was a light, something like a gas lamp, not electric. Lucas insisted on that. "More yellow," he said, "and slower." His mother thought he'd seen it in old movies. But Lucas didn't watch movies. One night, Lucas murmured in his sleep, not a name, not a word, just one sentence. He wasn't supposed to stand there. In that moment, Emily felt her chest tighten, because that didn't sound like a dream sentence. It sounded like something said afterward, like regret. In the morning, Emily asked him, "What did you mean?" Lucas shrugged. "I don't know," he said, but it was already too late. At school, Lucas began standing alone during recess. He didn't play, he didn't fight, he just watched. One day, a classmate fell to the ground. The child started crying. Lucas flinched. He jumped up, but he didn't look at the child. He looked at the ground, at the wet surface. The teacher noticed. "Lucas, are you okay?" she asked. Lucas nodded, but his face had gone pale. That evening, his father David tried to talk to him. "Do you ever feel guilty?" he asked, "for no clear reason?" Lucas didn't answer at first. Then he looked up. "If you did something," he said, "but you don't remember it anymore, are you still responsible?" David couldn't answer that. That night, for the first time, Lucas saw a face in his dream. But it wasn't clear. There was only the look, surprised, hurt, and as if it knew Lucas. When Lucas woke up in the morning, he said something new, for the first time. "It wasn't my face." His mother asked what he meant. Lucas didn't answer. But from that day on, when he looked in the mirror, he began tilting his head slightly to the side, as if he weren't looking at himself, but at someone else, and by then everyone could see it. Lucas wasn't remembering something. He was carrying something. Father Michael Carter had served at San Donato Cathedral in Arezzo for 20 years. He knew why people came to this city's church. Fear, regret, unfinished confessions. But children were rare. When he first saw Lucas, it wasn't the boy's height that set him apart. It was his silence. When Lucas entered the confessional, Father Carter didn't speak right away. He listened to the boy's breathing. This wasn't the breath of a frightened child. It was calm, deep, as if he had come to a familiar place. When Lucas spoke, he didn't choose his words. He chose his pauses. After certain sentences, he stopped. He didn't continue. And in that moment, Father Carter realized something. This child wasn't hiding the things he couldn't explain. He was placing them. When the confession ended, Lucas left quickly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a prayer. Father Carter watched him walk to the door. And as he looked after the boy, a thought unsettled him for the first time. This child didn't tell me something, but he took something from me. That day, Father Carter didn't write in his notebook. Normally, he always did. This time, he didn't even pick up the pen. The following Sunday, Lucas came to church again. This time, he wasn't alone. He was with his family. Emily and David looked like parents who couldn't explain their child's silence. Kind, but tired. While giving the sermon, Father Carter watched Lucas. The boy never lifted his head, but when the prayer began, he placed his hands on his knees, upside down. Father Carter knew this wasn't a habit. After the service, Emily asked to speak with the priest. "My son has been a little different lately," she said. "He has dreams, but he isn't afraid." Father Carter nodded. It was the strangest concern he had ever heard. "Lucas," he said gently, "do you like coming to church?" Lucas didn't answer at first. Then he lifted his head. His gaze met the priest directly. "It's quiet here," he said. "You hear more clearly." "Hear what?" Father Carter asked. Lucas shrugged. "Those who are late." Emily pretended she hadn't heard the sentence, but something shifted inside Father Carter. That evening, Father Carter tried to pray, but the words wouldn't settle. For the first time, a sentence spoken by a child wouldn't leave his mind. Those who are late. The next day, Father Carter went down into the church archives. There was no official reason. He just wanted to look. Dusty shelves, old notebooks, records. Some things survived in writing. Others survived in silence. And for the first time, Father Michael Carter thought this: some confessions aren't made to be told. They're made to be found. The archive of San Donato Cathedral was the least visited place in the church. Father Michael Carter had been here many times over the years. Baptism records, marriage registers, lists of the dead. But what he was looking for that day had no name, only a feeling. The pages of the old ledgers had yellowed. The ink had faded in places. Some entries looked rushed. One particular period caught his attention. The handwriting was consistent, but the spaces between the lines were wide, as if someone had chosen not to write certain things. As Father Carter turned the pages, he thought of the street Lucas kept drawing. Narrow, stone paved, always wet. There were many streets like that in Arezzo, but not all were the same. Some sloped sharply, some were flat. The street Lucas drew sloped gently. Father Carter opened an old map from the archive. The city as it was a century ago, before electricity, when gas lamps lit the streets. He stopped. One street on the map looked disturbingly similar to Lucas's drawing. He told himself it meant nothing. He had to. But then another detail surfaced in his mind. Something Lucas had said. More yellow? and slower. That was exactly the light of gas lamps. Father Carter closed the map. He took a deep breath. He could have stopped there. He could have explained everything as a child's imagination. But he didn't. He opened another ledger. This one didn't list events, only notes. Short, incomplete, half sentences. One line stood out. Incident occurring at night, in a narrow street. Incident. What had happened was not written. Next to it, only one more phrase. No witnesses. Father Carter's hand rested on the page. This didn't read like an official report. It read like something meant to be forgotten. That evening, Lucas came to the church again. This time, he didn't enter the confessional. He sat quietly in one of the pews. Father Carter approached him. "Why did you come here today?" he asked. Lucas answered without thinking. "To look." "At what?" the priest asked. Lucas lifted his head slightly. He looked up at the ceiling of the church, then lowered his gaze, to see if anything had changed. Father Carter didn't ask the question forming in his mind. Since when? Before Lucas stood up, he added one last thing. "Sometimes you think no one saw. But the stones did." That sentence felt heavier than anything Father Carter had read in the archive. That night, the priest spread the map across his desk. He placed the ledgers beside it. For the first time, a child's words and written records lay side by side on the same table, and both of them pointed to the same gaps. There was no name yet, no date, no crime, but there was suspicion, and once suspicion settles in, it does not leave with prayer. When Father Michael Carter left the archive, he had already made his decision. Those ledgers were not enough on their own. Some events never entered the church records. Others entered, but were never kept there. The next day, he went to Arezzo's old public library. It was as quiet as the church, but less sacred. And because of that, people wrote more freely there. Old newspapers were stored inside wooden cabinets. The pages were fragile. The ink had bled. Father Carter didn't search by year. He searched by headlines. Night in the street. Unidentified. Ordinary words, but in some articles, the same words appeared again and again. One clipping caught his eye. It wasn't a headline. It was buried on a lower page. Regarding an incident that occurred at night in a narrow street, no official statement has been released. What the incident was never written. Only fragments remained. Wet ground, gas lamp, a brief disturbance, and then silence. In another clipping, a small correction appeared the following day. There have been no new developments regarding the previous day's report. That sentence unsettled Father Carter. No new developments, which meant something had been expected. But nothing came. When he left the library, Father Carter walked back to the church. He deliberately took the long way. He passed through streets that resembled the ones Lucas had drawn. He studied the stones, the slopes. Some streets were unchanged. Even after 100 years, stone remained stone. He stopped in one of them. The gas lamp was gone now, but on the wall there was still a trace, a metal bracket, rusting, and in that moment a thought crossed his mind. Uninvited. Someone could have stood here. That evening he saw Lucas again. The church was empty. Lucas sat quietly in one of the pews. Father Carter sat beside him. This time he didn't ask a question. The silence stretched. Then Lucas spoke. Sometimes, he said, you don't remember doing something, but when you pass certain places, your chest tightens. Father Carter didn't turn his head. He just listened. Some streets, Lucas continued, aren't like other streets. The sound takes longer to disappear. What sound? The priest asked. Lucas didn't answer. He nudged a stone with the tip of his shoe. "This stone moves," he said. "It didn't used to." In that moment, Father Carter realized something. What Lucas was describing wasn't changing with time. The details were growing clearer, but the direction wasn't shifting. The same place, the same absence, the same missing piece. That night when the priest returned home, he opened his notebook. For the first time, he wrote something down. A single sentence. "This is not remembering. This is something unfinished." And now he was certain of one thing. This story was neither chosen by Lucas nor by the church. This story had been left incomplete. Everyone could see the change in Lucas now, but no one named it the same way. For his mother, Emily, it was just a phase. For his father, David, an oversensitivity that shouldn't be taken too seriously. For Father Michael Carter, it was a threshold. Lucas spoke less, but his silence didn't grow emptier. It grew heavier. At home, he would sit in his room for hours. He didn't read. He didn't play with toys. He just listened. One day, Emily opened his door slightly. Lucas was sitting on his bed. "Are you thinking about something?" she asked. Lucas shook his head. "No," he said. "Something is being thought." Emily didn't understand the sentence, and she didn't try to, because trying to understand it felt frightening. David was firmer. One evening, he sat Lucas down. "Sometimes we make things bigger in our heads," he said. "They pass." Lucas lowered his head, but his voice was calm. "Things that are meant to pass, pass," he said. "Some things stay." David heard the sentence, but he didn't dwell on it, because adults often survive by ignoring certain sentences spoken by children. Father Carter did the opposite. When Lucas came to the church, he no longer left him alone. But he didn't follow him either. He was simply present. One day Lucas sat in a pew. Father Carter didn't approach. Lucas spoke to himself. "Some things don't become lighter when they're told," he said. "It's like they just change places." Father Carter didn't hear this as a confession. He heard it as a warning. That week, Father Carter considered consulting a doctor. Could this be psychological? But then he remembered what Lucas described. The details were too consistent. They didn't shift with time. This wasn't the work of an imaginative mind. Lucas's withdrawal began to show physically. He ate less. He tired more easily. But when they went to the doctor, everything came back normal. "There's nothing wrong," the doctor said. "Maybe a bit of stress." As Lucas left the room, he looked at the pen on the doctor's desk. "These used to be heavier," he said. The doctor smiled. "Technology," he replied. Lucas didn't answer. That night, for the first time, Lucas felt the voices getting closer. They weren't shouting, but they weren't distant anymore. In the morning, he looked at his mother. "Mom," he said, "sometimes, even if people don't forgive you, you can forgive them, right?" Emily answered like a mother would. "Of course," she said. "What matters is your heart." Lucas nodded, but he wasn't relieved, because this question wasn't about the heart. That day, Father Carter made a decision. This story was no longer something a single person could carry, but he still didn't know who it could be told to. And Lucas, for the first time, felt this. The weight was beginning to pull him inward. Lucas came to the church earlier than usual that morning. The doors had just opened. No one was inside. The candles hadn't been lit yet. The silence wasn't the silence he knew. It felt like something was waiting for its place. Lucas didn't sit in the pews. He stood, then slowly walked toward the confessional. But he didn't go in. He stopped in front of the door. Father Michael Carter saw him from a distance. He didn't approach. He waited. When Lucas spoke, It sounded like he wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. Sometimes, he said, you don't want to tell something, because if you tell it, you have to understand who it belongs to. Father Carter felt his heart quicken, but he didn't show it. What do you mean? He asked. Lucas shrugged. If I did it, he said, then stopped. The sentence remained unfinished. But if it wasn't me, he continued, then why am I here? Father Carter didn't answer, because this question wasn't asking for one. Lucas looked down at the stone floor. Sometimes, he said, my feet don't want to stop, but I know I have to. When? The priest asked. Lucas spoke without lifting his head. Exactly at that moment. When Father Carter heard this, the first thing he felt wasn't fear. It was familiarity. It was the kind of sentence people think after something has already happened. Lucas fell silent for a while. Then he added, when someone falls, time slows down. This time Father Carter's hand moved instinctively to his rosary, but Lucas didn't continue. He only said, I didn't fall. The sentence was simple, but the space it left behind was heavy. Father Carter finally spoke. Lucas, he said gently but firmly, who are you? Lucas lifted his head. His gaze was calm, but it looked worn. I'm the one who's here right now, he said. I don't know the other one. When Lucas left the church that day for the first time, he looked back, as if he were leaving something behind. But in truth, something had come even closer to him. That evening, Father Carter went home and opened his notebook. For the second time, he wrote, this is not a memory. This is a direction. And he realized this. Lucas was no longer just someone who carried something. He was a threshold. Lucas had been walking more slowly these past days. He wasn't running. I'm not in a hurry, he said. But the truth was, his body was slowing him down. His mother, Emily, noticed, but she didn't say it out loud. Because admitting you notice certain things is how they become real. Lucas had trouble waking up in the mornings, but falling asleep wasn't easy either. At night, he kept changing positions. He would fall asleep in one corner of the bed and wake up in another, as if, in his dreams, he was trying to reach somewhere. One morning, he developed a fever. This time, it wasn't like before. It was quieter, heavier. Lucas wasn't shivering, but his eyes were looking far away. Do you want some water? His mother asked. Lucas nodded, but he didn't take the glass. In a moment, he said, first I'm here. Emily didn't understand that sentence at first, but then she felt it. There was a goodbye inside it. The doctor came again. He said the same things. Nothing serious. The body's tired. He needs rest. Lucas looked at the doctor. Some people, he said, stay on their feet for a very long time. The doctor smiled. That doesn't apply to children, he said. Lucas didn't reply. That day, Father Carter came by the house. Lucas was lying in bed. His eyes were open. The priest sat beside him. How are you today? He asked. Lucas didn't think. Lighter, he said. Is that a good thing? Father Carter asked. Lucas was quiet for a moment. I think so, he said, but also a little incomplete. Father Carter didn't reach out. He just stayed there. Lucas whispered, sometimes when something is completed, you can't hold on to what remains. The priest didn't write that sentence down, but it never left him. That night, Lucas's fever rose again. This time he didn't mumble. He didn't cry out. He just took one deep breath. Then his lips moved. It stopped now. His mother asked what had stopped. Lucas didn't answer, but for the first time his face was peaceful. That night, in his dream, Lucas saw the same street one last time. The stones were wet, the gas lamp was lit, but this time, no one was running. Someone was on the ground, and Lucas was standing. He stepped closer. He bent down. He reached out his hand. When morning came, the house was silent, very silent. When morning came, Arezzo was the same as always. The streets opened, shops lifted their shutters, the church doors quietly parted. But for Father Michael Carter, that morning was not ordinary. He didn't see Lucas that day, but his absence was everywhere. The church pews were the same. The candles burned the same way. Yet something was no longer where it belonged. Father Carter didn't tell anyone anything that day. No one asked. When Emily and David went to the hospital, the doctors gave no clear reason. The heart, they said. Sometimes it happens. It sounded like an answer, but it wasn't. That evening, Father Carter stayed alone in the church. He stood in front of the confessional. He didn't go inside. He placed his hand on the door and stayed like that for a while. Then he pulled it back. That day he wrote no report. He informed no institution. He opened no file. Because some stories, when written down, remain unfinished. That night he sat beside the archived ledgers. He read the sentences he had written before. This is not memory. This is something unfinished. This is a direction. He closed the notebook and added one final line. Some burdens do not come to be carried, but to be laid down. The next day, Father Carter returned the old map in the church archive to its place. He never opened the page that showed the streets lit by gas lamps. He did not ask the family for Lucas's drawings, because some things, once proven, lose their meaning. That week, Father Carter repeated the same sentence in every sermon. No one knew why. Not everything must be spoken. Lucas's name was never mentioned in the church again, but for Father Carter, the story wasn't over. It had simply become unspeakable, and some stories are only completed when silence is kept. That night, the dream Lucas saw was unlike the others. There was no urgency, no confusion. Everything was where it was meant to be. The narrow street was there again. The stones were wet, but this time they weren't slippery. The gas lamp was lit. Its light was steady. It didn't flicker. Lucas wasn't walking. He wasn't running. He was standing. In the middle of the street, at the place that had always remained distant before, someone was there. This time, he wasn't running away. He wasn't hiding. He was simply standing. Lucas moved closer, and as the distance between them shrank, he noticed something for the first time. There was no fear, not in Lucas, not in the man before him. The man looked at Lucas. His gaze was familiar, but that familiarity didn't come from remembering. It came from acceptance. Lucas didn't speak, because some moments cannot carry words. The man slightly lowered his head. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a farewell. It was more like saying, "It's finished now." For the first time, Lucas looked at his hands. This time they weren't heavy. Then Lucas reached out his hand, but not to hold, to let go. The man stepped back. The light passed between them. The street grew quiet. The gas lamp went out. When Lucas woke up, morning light filled the room. He had no fever. His breathing was steady. His mother was beside him. When Emily held his hand, for the first time, Lucas's hand was warm. Lucas opened his eyes and looked at her. "Mom," he said, "no one is waiting anymore." Emily didn't ask what he meant, because this time, Lucas's voice sounded complete. Lucas closed his eyes again. This time he didn't fall asleep. He simply rested. And in that moment, what Lucas had been carrying was finally placed where it never belonged to him. After Lucas, nothing changed in Arezzo. The streets stayed the same. The stones were still the same stones. The church doors opened every morning, as always. But some places no longer felt the same. Father Michael Carter never spoke Lucas's name. He didn't mention him in his sermons. He didn't write him into his notebooks. But every Sunday, he would pause for a moment and look at the same pew. No one knew why. Lucas's family didn't leave the city. Emily and David kept living, the way people do. But on some mornings when Emily stepped into Lucas's room, she would stop for a second before opening the window, as if there were still an unfinished breath inside. Months later, Father Carter reorganized the church archive. He took one of the old ledgers, turned its pages, stopped at the section about the narrow street, and added a single note. These lines do not describe a memory, they describe a burden. No name, no date, just that. There was a street in Arezzo. No one thought of it as special. But after rain, when the stones were wet, some people would slow their steps as they passed through, without knowing why. Years later, when Father Michael Carter retired, he was asked one question: what was the confession that affected you the most? He didn't answer directly. He only said, sometimes people don't confess anything. They just let something go. And that day, for the first time, he locked the confessional door. The story doesn't end here, but it isn't told, because some things are not lived to be known, but to find their place, and some children don't come into this world to stay for a long time. They come to put something back where it belongs.